Officer Derek Lansing thought he was protecting Florida's coastline. As a beach patrol officer for the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, he took his role seriously. 14 years on the job had taught him to watch for suspicious activity along the barrier islands. Poachers, trespassers, people who didn't belong. When he saw a black man alone on a restricted section of beach at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, crouched near the waterline with equipment bags spread around him, every prejudiced instinct told him this was unauthorized activity. The man didn't fit his image of the researchers and scientists who usually work these waters. His presence, in Lansing's biased judgment, required intervention. But when he approached Dr. Jamal Richardson and demanded identification, Lansing made a catastrophic miscalculation. Dr. Jamal Marcus Richardson, 43, was one of the nation's leading marine biologists. He held a PhD in marine science from the University of Miami and served as Director of Coastal Research for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. For 18 years, he'd studied sea turtle nesting patterns, coral reef health, and coastal ecosystem restoration along Florida's Atlantic coast. He was born in Tallahassee, Florida, a fourth-generation Floridian. His great-grandfather had been born in Florida in 1891. And what Lansing didn't know, what he'd completely forgotten in his rush to remove someone he assumed didn't belong, was that his own body camera was recording everything, every word he spoke, every dismissal of credentials, every moment of his racial profiling, captured in high-definition video with GPS coordinates, timestamps, and crystal-clear audio from the very equipment meant to protect officers from false accusations. That body camera, combined with footage from beach security cameras and 3 witnesses recording on their phones, would become the evidence that destroyed Lansing's career and cost Brevard County $28.9 million. The largest civil rights settlement in Florida history. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Officer Derek Lansing had worked for the Brevard County Sheriff's Office for 14 years, building what his supervisors called a solid record of beach patrol and coastal enforcement. But beneath that reputation lay 31 complaints over 11 years from citizens alleging discriminatory enforcement, harassment of minorities in public spaces, and selective application of beach access regulations. Each complaint had been reviewed by Internal Affairs and dismissed as misunderstandings or differences of opinion about enforcement priorities. Lansing had learned that as long as he claimed to be protecting sensitive coastal areas or responding to potential violations, his department would support him. He'd been written up twice for failing to document reasonable suspicion in beach stops. Both write-ups were placed in his file with no further action taken. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office had implemented mandatory body cameras 4 years earlier after a federal consent decree following a pattern and practice investigation. Officers were required to activate their cameras for all citizen interactions, all calls for service, and all enforcement actions. The policy was clear. Failure to activate body cameras could result in suspension or termination. In practice, Lansing had failed to activate his camera on 17 documented occasions over the past 4 years, always during interactions that later resulted in complaints about beach access stops involving people of color. Each time he'd claimed the device malfunctioned or that he'd forgotten in the urgency of the situation. But on this Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., Lansing had activated his body camera when he parked his patrol ATV and began walking toward the lone figure on the beach. Whether out of habit or confidence that he was legitimately investigating suspicious activity, the camera was on, recording, documenting everything. That decision would prove to be his complete downfall. Dr. Jamal Marcus Richardson, 43, was everything Derek Lansing wasn't. Where Lansing had barely finished community college, Richardson held a PhD in marine science from the University of Miami, completed in 2009 after 6 years of rigorous research. Where Lansing patrolled beaches looking for violations, Richardson had dedicated his entire adult life to protecting those same coastal ecosystems through science and policy. As Director of Coastal Research for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Richardson oversaw a team of 23 scientists studying everything from sea turtle nesting success rates to microplastic contamination in coastal waters. His research had influenced state policy on beach development restrictions and coastal construction setbacks. He'd testified before the Florida legislature 7 times, published 43 peer-reviewed papers in leading marine science journals, won the Governor's Environmental Leadership Award in 2019. He was also a fourth-generation Floridian. His family had lived in Florida since before statehood. His great-grandfather, born in 1891 in Tallahassee, had been among the first black landowners in Leon County. His grandfather had served in World War II. His father had been a school teacher in Jacksonville for 38 years. Jamal Richardson's roots in Florida soil ran deeper than most white families who'd arrived in the state's population boom of the 1970s and 80s. That Tuesday morning had started like hundreds before it. Richardson woke at 4:30 a.m. In his home in Melbourne Beach, loaded his equipment into his state-issued SUV, and drove 7 miles north to a restricted research zone on the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. This section of beach had been closed to public access since 1986 to protect one of the most important sea turtle nesting sites in the Western Hemisphere. Richardson had been granted permanent access by both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Florida DEP. His laminated access card, badge number FDCR0047, authorized him to enter restricted beach zones at any time for research purposes. He'd been using this same beach access point for 11 years, had collected water samples, documented erosion patterns, and monitored nesting activity during every sea turtle season since 2013. He arrived at 6:22 a.m., parked in the designated research vehicle area, and walked 200 yards across the dunes to the waterline. The sun was just beginning to rise. The beach was empty except for a few early morning joggers a quarter-mile south, perfect conditions for collecting undisturbed water samples before human activity increased. Richardson set up his equipment: 3 collection bottles, a water temperature probe, a turbidity meter, a GPS unit to record exact sample locations, his Florida DEP identification badge clipped to his khaki field vest, his access card in the chest pocket, everything exactly as he'd done it hundreds of times before. He was crouched at the waterline filling the second sample bottle when he noticed the Beach Patrol ATV approaching from the north. The ATV stopped about 50 yards away. A uniformed officer got out and began walking toward him with deliberate purpose. Richardson looked up, smiled, and waved. He assumed this was a routine check. It happened occasionally. Beach Patrol officers would see his equipment, approach to verify he was authorized research personnel, then move on. Usually took less than 2 minutes. But when Officer Derek Lansing got close enough for Richardson to see his expression, something felt wrong. The officer's posture was aggressive. His hand rested on his duty belt. His face was set in hard lines. Everything was about to change. Lansing's body camera captured his approach across the sand, the view bouncing slightly with each step. The camera recorded the early morning light, the gentle waves, the peaceful beach scene. Then it captured Jamal Richardson coming into frame, crouched near the water, surrounded by scientific equipment, his Florida DEP badge clearly visible on his vest. The camera recorded Lansing's voice cutting through the morning quiet. "You need to leave this beach right now." Richardson looked up, genuinely confused. The body camera captured his face, his friendly expression shifting to concern. "Officer, I'm conducting research. I have every right to be here." "I don't care what you claim you're doing," Lansing said, the microphone picking up the dismissive edge in his tone. "This is a restricted area. Show me your fishing license and identification now." The camera recorded Richardson setting down his sample bottle and standing slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate and non-threatening. "This isn't a fishing expedition," he said calmly. "I'm a marine biologist. These are water samples for coastal monitoring." Lansing's camera captured him stepping closer, invading Richardson's personal space. "Let me see your papers," he demanded. "Prove you're authorized to be on this beach." The body camera recorded Richardson reaching slowly into his vest pocket, pulling out the laminated access card. The card was clearly visible in the frame as Richardson held it up. "Officer, I'm Dr. Jamal Richardson. I'm a marine biologist with Florida DEP. This is my permanent access authorization, badge number FDCR0047. The camera captured Lansing glancing at the card, his eyes barely registering it before looking away. "I need to see your driver's license," he said, "and proof you're supposed to be here." Richardson's voice remained steady, the microphone capturing his careful tone. "My access card is proof. This badge authorizes me to conduct research in restricted zones. I've been working this site for 11 years. "Where's your fishing license?" Lansing demanded, the camera view shifting as he gestured toward the equipment bags. "I'm not fishing," Richardson repeated, his patience showing the first signs of strain. "I'm a state employee conducting authorized coastal monitoring. I collect water samples. I document erosion patterns. I study sea turtle nesting. This is my job." The camera recorded the moment a jogger appeared in the background, slowing as she noticed the confrontation. She pulled out her phone, started recording. The body camera captured her presence, though Lansing gave no indication he'd noticed. Sir, you're on state property without proper authorization, Lansing said, his voice hardening. I'm giving you one more chance to show me valid identification and proof of permission to be here. Richardson's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet, the tremor visible on Lansing's body camera. The footage showed him pulling out his Florida driver's license and his Florida DEP employee identification card. Both clearly displayed his name, his photograph, his credentials. Lansing's camera recorded him taking the IDs, barely glancing at them. These don't prove you have permission to be in a restricted zone, he said. Officer, Richardson said, and for the first time his voice carried an edge of frustration. I'm an American citizen. I was born in Tallahassee, Florida. I work for the state of Florida. That employee ID proves I'm a Florida DEP scientist. That access card proves I'm authorized to be here. What crime have I committed? The body camera captured Lansing's jaw tightening. That's not my concern, he said. You're trespassing on state property and I'm giving you one chance to comply voluntarily. Gather your equipment and leave this beach or you're under arrest. Before Richardson could respond, a voice called out from behind Lansing. Excuse me, officer, is there a problem? Lansing's body camera swiveled as he turned, capturing a white couple in their 60s approaching across the sand. The man wore a University of Florida marine science t-shirt and carried binoculars. The woman had a camera with a telephoto lens. I'm handling a trespassing situation, Lansing said, his tone brooking no interference. That's Dr. Richardson, the man said, confusion evident in his voice. He's with Florida DEP. We see him here all the time during nesting season. The woman nodded, her camera still in her hands. We're volunteer turtle monitors. We recognize him from the annual training sessions. Lansing's camera recorded his hand moving to rest more firmly on his duty belt. I need you to step back, he said to the couple. This doesn't concern you. But he's authorized to be here, the man insisted. We've seen his research set up dozens of times. Sir, Lansing's voice rose, step back now or you're interfering with an officer. The couple stepped back, but the woman kept her camera raised, recording. The body camera captured their shocked expressions, their whispered conversation. Richardson took a slow breath, the microphone picking up the sound. The camera recorded his attempt to de-escalate. Officer, I can call my supervisor at Florida DEP, Dr. Angela Martinez. She can verify my authorization. Her direct line is, I don't need to call anyone, Lansing interrupted. You either leave voluntarily or I arrest you for trespassing. Should beach patrol officers be required to verify credentials before arresting state employees on restricted beaches? Comment your thoughts below. This wasn't just about one man being questioned. This was about whether black professionals can work in public spaces without being assumed to be criminals. The jogger with the phone had moved closer, her device clearly recording. The couple stood 30 feet away, also filming. Lansing's own body camera documented it all from his perspective, creating a multi-angle record of what happened next. Officer Lansing, Richardson said, his voice controlled but firm, you are about to make a serious mistake. I am a United States citizen conducting authorized research on state property. I have shown you my credentials. I have explained my purpose. Under the Fourth Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to detain me. You have no such suspicion because I'm not committing any crime. The body camera captured Lansing's face flushing red, his hands clenched. Don't lecture me about the law, he said. Last chance. Leave now. Richardson stood his ground. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. I'm exercising my constitutional right to be present in a public space where I'm legally authorized to work. If you arrest me, there will be consequences. Lansing pulled his handcuffs from his belt, the metallic sound captured clearly on his microphone. Turn around, he ordered, hands behind your back. The body camera recorded Richardson complying slowly, turning, placing his hands behind him. The footage showed his shoulders tense, his head held high. I'm not resisting, Richardson said clearly, his voice directed at all the recording devices. I'm complying under protest. I have committed no crime. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed on the audio feed. The camera captured Richardson wincing slightly as the cuffs tightened around his wrists. The couple gasped, audible on Lansing's microphone. The jogger moved closer, her phone camera zooming in. The body camera's view captured it all. A peaceful beach, the morning sun casting long shadows across white sand. Scientific equipment scattered near the waterline, expensive turbidity meters, calibrated thermometers, sample bottles with carefully written labels. A black man in handcuffs dressed in professional field attire with a state agency badge visible on his vest. 3 witnesses recording everything from multiple angles. The absurdity of the scene was captured in perfect clarity. No violence, no disturbance, no crime, just a man being arrested for the act of working while black. "What's your badge number?" Richardson asked, his voice steady despite his circumstances. The body camera's microphone picked up the controlled tone, the deliberate calm of someone who understood that his composure in this moment mattered. Lansing didn't answer. The camera recorded him grabbing Richardson's arm firmly, fingers pressing into the fabric of the field vest as he guided him toward the patrol ATV. The footage showed Richardson's careful, measured steps across the sand, his hands still cuffed behind him, his head held high despite the humiliation of being perp-walked across a beach where he'd worked for over a decade. "Officer Derek Lansing," Richardson continued, his voice rising so all the microphones would capture it clearly. "Badge number what?" "I'm asking for your identification." The couple called out, "We're recording this. We saw everything." "Me too," the jogger added. "I got the whole thing on video." Lansing's body camera captured him loading Richardson into the back of the patrol ATV, the scientist's hand still cuffed behind him, his expensive water sampling equipment left scattered on the beach. The timestamp on the footage read 07:03:14, 16 minutes from first contact to arrest. Before Lansing drove away, Richardson turned his head to look directly at the body camera lens mounted on Lansing's chest. The footage captured the moment with perfect clarity. "My name is Dr. Jamal Marcus Richardson," he said, each word pronounced carefully. "I am a marine biologist and director of coastal research for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I was born in Tallahassee, Florida on June 12, 1982. I am a fourth-generation Floridian and a United States citizen. I have never been arrested. I have never committed a crime." "Officer Derek Lansing, badge number," Lansing interrupted by turning away, but Richardson raised his voice. "Badge number visible on your uniform, 2847, approached me while I was conducting authorized state research and demanded that I leave a beach where I have permanent access authorization. When I presented my credentials and explained my legal right to be present, he arrested me. This is racial profiling. This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. This is what happens when a black man in America is assumed to be a criminal for doing his job." The statement was captured in perfect audio and video clarity, every word preserved, every detail documented. Richardson's dignity maintained even in handcuffs, his calm recitation of facts contrasting sharply with the absurdity of his arrest. Lansing drove the ATV back to his patrol vehicle, transferred Richardson to the back of his cruiser, and transported him to the Brevard County Jail. The entire journey was recorded on multiple camera systems: dashboard camera in the cruiser, body camera on Lansing, security cameras at the jail. Richardson was processed for trespassing on state property and obstruction of an officer, fingerprinted, photographed, placed in a holding cell for 6 hours before being released on his own recognizance. The charges: criminal trespass on posted property, a first-degree misdemeanor; obstructing or opposing an officer without violence, a first-degree misdemeanor. But Dr. Jamal Marcus Richardson hadn't spent 18 years building his career and reputation to be intimidated by an illegal arrest based solely on the color of his skin. 3 days after his release, he walked into the offices of the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama. The attorney who met with him, a woman named Patricia Okafor, with 24 years of experience in civil rights litigation and a track record of winning multi-million-dollar settlements, listened to his story with visible anger building. When he finished, she leaned forward. "Do you have copies of your credentials?" she asked. Richardson handed her a folder. "Florida DEP Employee ID, Federal Research Permits, Access Authorizations, Publications List, letters from the governor's office praising his environmental work." Okafor reviewed each document. Then she said what Richardson already knew. "This is one of the clearest civil rights violations I've seen in my career. We're going to destroy them." Okafor requested the body camera footage under Florida's public records law. When it arrived 2 weeks later, she watched every second. Then she watched the footage from the beach security cameras that monitored the restricted zone. Then she reviewed the videos uploaded to social media by the 3 witnesses. The footage was devastating. It showed Richardson calmly presenting credentials. It showed him accurately citing the Fourth Amendment. It showed Lansing dismissing valid identification without even examining it. It showed the arrest of a man who was clearly doing exactly what he said he was doing, working. But Okafor discovered something even more damning. She requested all of Lansing's body camera footage from beach patrol stops over the previous 5 years. What she found shocked even her. Of the 117 times Lansing had stopped people on Brevard County beaches for alleged violations, 93 had been people of color. The body camera footage showed a consistent pattern: Lansing approaching black and Hispanic beachgoers, demanding identification, making immediate assumptions of wrongdoing. Threatening arrest for vague violations, the footage showed him stopping black families and demanding they prove they lived in beachfront neighborhoods, stopping Hispanic fishermen and confiscating equipment without checking licenses, approaching people of color with aggression while walking past white beachgoers engaged in identical activities. In 14 other instances where complaints had been filed against Lansing, his body camera had mysteriously not been activated, conveniently leaving no video record of interactions that witnesses described as racially motivated harassment. Okafor compiled a 70-page complaint with video evidence, statistical analysis, and witness statements. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of Dr. Richardson against Officer Derek Lansing, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, and Brevard County for violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit also named Sheriff Robert Ivy as a defendant for failure to train, failure to supervise, and deliberate indifference to a pattern of constitutional violations. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Florida opened a parallel criminal investigation. This wasn't just one bad arrest. The body camera evidence showed systematic discrimination enabled by departmental indifference. Federal prosecutors discovered internal emails that proved Sheriff Ivy was aware of Lansing's pattern. In one email from 2021, Lansing had asked about handling beach access questions from what he called questionable visitors to restricted areas. The sheriff's response: "Use your discretion to maintain the character of our beaches. We support you." That email, combined with the body camera evidence and statistical analysis, proved departmental knowledge and tacit approval of Lansing's discriminatory enforcement. Derek Lansing was arrested 8 months after Richardson's beach arrest. He was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Sheriff Ivy was charged as a co-conspirator under 18 U.S.C. Section 241 for conspiracy to deprive civil rights. The trial began 14 months after Richardson's arrest. The federal courthouse in Orlando was packed every single day. Environmental scientists, civil rights activists, members of Florida's black community, law enforcement reform advocates, and national media. The prosecution's case was built on video evidence. They played Lansing's body camera footage from Richardson's arrest on massive courtroom monitors. The jury, 12 Floridians from across the district, 8 white, 3 black, 1 Hispanic, watched from Lansing's own perspective as he approached a man clearly engaged in scientific work, dismissed legitimate credentials, and arrested him for asserting constitutional rights. Then prosecutors played footage from 17 other incidents showing the same pattern: 93 stops of people of color over 5 years, body camera evidence of Lansing's selective enforcement, dismissal of valid fishing licenses, threats of arrest for asking questions, aggressive escalation when citizens asserted their rights. The statistical expert testified that based on beach user demographics and violation rates, the probability of Lansing's stop pattern being random was less than 0.001%. This was intentional discrimination. Dr. Richardson testified for 4 hours. He walked the jury through his educational journey: undergraduate degree in biology from Florida A&M University, master's degree in marine science from the University of South Florida, PhD from the University of Miami's prestigious Rosenstiel School. He described his dissertation on sea turtle hatchling survival rates and how it had influenced coastal lighting regulations across the southeastern United States. He explained his current role in meticulous detail, the scope of his research, the importance of regular water sampling to monitor pollution levels and harmful algal blooms, the significance of the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge as one of only 2 locations in the world where all 5 species of sea turtles that live in the Atlantic Ocean come to nest. He described his permanent access authorization, how he'd applied for it in 2012 through a rigorous federal and state permitting process, how he'd renewed it every 3 years with letters of recommendation from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. How his badge number, FDCR 0047, was registered in a federal database accessible to any law enforcement officer who took 30 seconds to verify it. Then he described the morning of his arrest in calm, precise detail that made the injustice even starker. The water samples he was collecting, part of a long-term data set on coastal water quality that stretched back to 2009. The equipment he was using, $18,000 worth of scientific instruments purchased with state and federal research funds. The credentials he presented, laminated cards issued by government agencies specifically to identify him as authorized personnel, his repeated explanations that went ignored, his citations of the Fourth Amendment that were dismissed, his professional identity reduced to nothing in Lansing's eyes because his skin was black. "You're one of the nation's leading marine biologists," Okafor said during direct examination, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "You work for the state of Florida. You were born here. Your family has been here for 4 generations. Your great-grandfather was born in Florida in 1891, before my own grandparents immigrated to this country. Why do you think Officer Lansing assumed you were trespassing?" Richardson paused. He looked at the jury, then at Lansing, who sat at the defense table refusing to make eye contact, then back at the jury. "Because I'm black," he said simply, his voice clear and unwavering. Because in Officer Lansing's mind, a black man on a beach at dawn, even one wearing a state agency badge, even one surrounded by obvious scientific equipment, even one presenting valid government credentials, couldn't possibly be a scientist, couldn't possibly belong, had to be up to something wrong. That's the only explanation that fits the evidence. Every other explanation fails when you examine the body camera footage. 3 jurors were visibly crying. Others looked angry, betrayed that this could happen in their state. The defense argued Lansing had acted on reasonable suspicion that Richardson was engaged in unauthorized activity in a restricted zone. But the body camera footage destroyed that argument at every turn. The video showed Richardson's badge clearly visible, showed him presenting valid credentials, showed him calmly explaining his authorization, showed Lansing refusing to even examine the evidence. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Richardson collapsed into his wife's arms, tears streaming down his face for the first time since the arrest. 18 months of anger, humiliation, and violation released in that moment of vindication. Sheriff Ivey, who had pleaded guilty before trial to avoid prison time, received 3 years probation and was forced to resign. Lansing was terminated from the sheriff's office within hours of the verdict. The civil trial proceeded separately 8 months later. The jury heard testimony from clinical psychologists who evaluated Richardson's trauma. They heard about the panic attacks that now struck him whenever he encountered law enforcement. The hypervigilance, constantly looking over his shoulder, documenting every interaction, carrying multiple forms of identification everywhere he went. The way he could no longer work alone on remote beaches where he'd spent his entire career. How he now brought a colleague with him for every field visit, not because the science required it, but because he was terrified of being arrested again. They heard from his wife, Dr. Michelle Richardson, a professor of environmental science at Florida Institute of Technology. She described watching her husband, brilliant, accomplished, dedicated to protecting Florida's coastal ecosystems, reduced to fear. How he woke up from nightmares about being arrested, handcuffed, imprisoned for crimes he didn't commit. How he'd had to start therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder at age 43 because a police officer refused to look at his credentials. They heard from Richardson's supervisor at Florida DEP, who testified about the chilling effect the arrest had on the agency's minority scientists. 3 young researchers of color had left the department in the year following Richardson's arrest, citing fear of working in the field in Florida. The state had lost talent. The environment had lost advocates. All because one officer couldn't imagine that a black man belonged on a beach. They heard from the 83 other victims Okafor had identified through the painstaking review of 5 years of body camera footage. Black families who'd been humiliated on vacation, ordered to prove they were staying at beachfront hotels they'd paid thousands of dollars to book. Hispanic fishermen whose expensive equipment was confiscated even after showing valid licenses. A black photographer told to stop shooting wedding photos on a public beach because a white couple complained. A dark-skinned Indian family ordered to prove citizenship while eating lunch at a beach pavilion, each story built on the last. Each victim's testimony drove home the systematic nature of Lansing's discrimination. The damages phase lasted 3 weeks. When the jury announced the verdict, the courtroom exploded with cheers that echoed through the courthouse halls, bringing security running to make sure there wasn't a disturbance. $20 million in compensatory damages, itemized as $4 million for emotional distress and mental anguish, $3 million for damage to professional reputation, $8 million for loss of enjoyment of life and ability to work freely in his chosen profession, and $5 million for the egregious violation of clearly established constitutional rights. $8.9 million in punitive damages, calculated at exactly 1 year of Brevard County's beach services budget, chosen specifically to send a message that counties cannot allow officers to systematically discriminate and expect to pay trivial amounts when caught. Total, $28.9 million. The the largest civil rights settlement in Florida history, the largest beach access discrimination case in American legal history. The verdict made national headlines: CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times. Every major publication covered the story of the marine biologist arrested for working on a Florida beach. The body camera footage went viral, viewed 47 million times in the first week after release. Derek Lansing was sentenced under federal guidelines to 2 years and 8 months in federal prison for deprivation of rights under color of law. He was also permanently barred from working in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office, under a federal consent decree, implemented sweeping reforms: mandatory training on implicit bias and Fourth Amendment rights with quarterly testing and recertification, new policies requiring officers to thoroughly examine all credentials before initiating enforcement action, body camera review protocols for all beach stops with civilian oversight review of any stops involving people of color, statistical monitoring of stop patterns with quarterly public reporting, a specialized beach access ombudsman position to receive complaints about discriminatory enforcement, zero-tolerance policy for failure to activate body cameras. The settlement included provisions to contact and compensate the 83 other victims identified through body camera review, with a $6 million compensation fund managed by an independent administrator. Dr. Jamal Richardson used a portion of his settlement to establish the Coastal Access Defense Fund, providing free legal representation to people of color subjected to discriminatory enforcement in Florida's public beaches and coastal areas. He returned to his research work, though with a heightened awareness that accompanied him to every beach. He became a powerful voice on the intersection of environmental justice and civil rights, testifying before the Florida legislature about how communities of color are disproportionately excluded from coastal recreation and conservation work. The body camera footage from his arrest became required viewing in every law enforcement training academy in Florida, a stark example of how assumptions based on race can lead officers to arrest the very professionals working to protect the state's natural resources. The irony wasn't lost on civil rights advocates. Derek Lansing had activated his body camera following department policy, confident he was legitimately addressing suspicious activity in a restricted zone. That body camera, meant to protect officers from false accusations, instead became the primary evidence of his 14-year pattern of racial discrimination. His own equipment recorded his bias, his dismissal of valid credentials, his rush to criminalize a black scientist for doing exactly what he was authorized to do. The lesson was clear: body cameras work both ways. They protect officers who act properly, but they also create irrefutable evidence when officers abuse their authority based on race. Derek Lansing walked onto a Florida beach expecting to remove someone he assumed didn't belong. He forgot, in his prejudiced certainty, that his own body camera was documenting everything. His 14-year career ended in federal prison, brought down by the very technology meant to protect him. Dr. Jamal Richardson walked onto that same beach to continue research he'd been conducting for 11 years. He experienced blatant racial profiling, but Lansing's own body camera captured the evidence that held him accountable, exposed a department-wide pattern of discrimination, and created lasting change for coastal access rights across Florida. If you believe that scientists deserve to work without being criminalized because of their race, that the Fourth Amendment means something even on a beach, and that standing up for your rights in the face of authority is the most American thing you can do, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we have another story that shows courage in the face of injustice, because the truth, when recorded and proven beyond doubt, has the power to change not just individual lives but entire systems. Freedom isn't just inherited, it's defended, every single day, by people brave enough to say, "I belong here,"